Hi, welcome! In this tutorial we'll explore techniques to optimize rendering speed. These techniques are highly effective. When used properly, they can deliver impressive results in reducing render time. The first technique is occlusion culling, which means that anything outside the camera's range will not be rendered. Navigate to render settings and then select simplify and then culling. Then enable the camera option for culling. Press 0 to switch to camera view. The culling option includes a number field that allows you to control the margin of culling. I mean the margin and range of the camera. The next option is cull distance, which means objects far from the camera will not be rendered. The distance is currently set to 50, but I can change it to any value I want. Then I need to select an object that I want to be culled and go to Object Properties. Visibility, then culling, press Use Camera Cull to activate it. And if you want to use distance culling for the object, press Use Distance Cull as well. I can activate these options for each object in the scene. If you have a set of objects like these rocks and you want to enable certain options for them, for example, if I want to enable distance culling for each one, I can select the first rock for which this option is enabled. Scroll down and press Shift, then select the last one. Afterward, right-click on the distance cull option, then press Copy to select it. Now all of my objects have this option enabled. If you are in rendering mode within the viewport and proceed to obtain the final render, you might encounter a GPU memory error or experience a slowdown in rendering speed. Press the Z key and select Solid to clear the GPU memory, then proceed to render your scene. If you have high poly objects situated far away or have applied displacement to them, it's advisable to reduce the polygon count. For example, if I navigate to the modifiers of this rock, I can observe that it has 4 levels of subdivisions. A high number of subdivisions for nearby objects is natural, but the distance objects, it's necessary to reduce this count. I need to change the subdivision levels for this rock to 1. And 0 for this rock, since it's far from the camera. With this technique I can optimize my scene and ultimately reduce render time. I still encounter issues, particularly when attempting to render the scene. Some of my objects still have subdivisions active in the viewport. I need to change them to 0 because I don't require them during render time and they can consume unnecessary RAM. I need to set the viewport subdivision field to 0 for every object as it's crucial for optimizing render time. Cycles is very powerful, but don't use it anywhere. Just use it for near distances, or if you want to render a detailed character or creature like this scene, you need to use cycles. If I use cycles for this scene, for example, you can see that it's too slow. I can switch the engine to Eevee, the real-time engine. I have another tutorial where I've described both engines, you can watch it here. I'll get lower quality with Eevee compared to cycles, but it's not too bad. Additionally, I can fix some issues with composition. You can switch to Eevee for environments since rendering them with cycles is too slow. With Eevee you only need a composition stage. Is it worth it? The next important part is samples. In the render settings I have 2 viewport and render sections. Let's open both. The max samples are set to 400 and the noise threshold is active. This option can automatically set the samples up to 400 and it will give me almost 32 samples. It's very good for animations because frames change rapidly and we can't perceive the image details. And if you wanna use denoising, put it on Open Image Denoise with Fast Pre-Filter. Set the render attributes like viewport, but change the denoise to accurate, and you can increase the minimum samples by adjusting the noise threshold. Let's compare these 2 render results. The first one has 32 samples, and this render has 1000 samples and took took 50 minutes and only has some small details compared to the previous render. If you are using something like clouds or fog or any object that prevents you from seeing the far distance, you can decrease the end distance of the camera to prevent rendering far objects. In the camera settings, let's decrease the end value. It's too high. 6000 is much better. I had many rocks in the far distance that I couldn't see, so I excluded them from the camera range. Volumes like fog or clouds that I have in this scene are very heavy to render, but I can almost fix them by adjusting the light paths in the render settings. And under max bounces, let's reduce the volume value. Now the light receiving process of the fog is decreased and rendering is faster. Here I have multiple lights in the scene, 2 area lights and 1 sunlight. These are physical lights and heavy to render. I can remove them. Instead of them, I can use HDRI lighting, which is lighter to render. Also, I have a tutorial on lighting techniques in Blender, and you can watch it here. HDRI is especially useful in exterior lighting, so try using it instead of sunlight. In this scene, my objects have 4K textures. Using 8K textures or higher requires more RAM and VRAM, and your system may ultimately crash. So try using 4K or even smaller textures. Another thing to note is when using the subdivision modifier, avoid using high values for levels, as it may consume a lot of RAM and potentially crash your system. Higher levels can increase render time, so choose proper values to achieve best result while also reducing render time. You need to be careful about your shaders. Complex calculations in shaders can increase render time. For example, this is one of my shaders and I kept it as simple as possible. Increasing the use of math nodes, mix nodes, or other calculator nodes can increase shader complexity. Or for other shaders like volumes which require many calculations, I need to use a few calculation nodes as possible. The output size has a big effect on your render time. You can render in 1080 quality and then increase the quality using AI image scaling if you want. There are many free AI tools that can do this work for you. If you want to render an animation, you can set the step fill to 2. In this scenario, if you render a range between 0 to 100 frames, it will ignore odd frames. Finally, you can fill the gaps using AI. For example, this free AI tool can fill the gaps and increase the frame rate for you. While this method may not be considered professional, those with a poor GPU can utilize this technique. If you are using hair, you'll realize it's very heavy. In the render section of hair, you can reduce the steps under the path section. It will decrease the hair smoothness. After that, you need to insert a proper value for number of children hairs. Here I have 100 children for each single hair. If I change it to 50, there is no significant difference and the hair still looks good. However, the render speed doubles. Also, you need to disable hair in the viewport when you want to render this scene because it uses a lot of RAM when active in the viewport. Let's work with other features in the render settings. In the light path section, I need to change these values for max bounces. I can reduce the total value to increase the speed of the render process. However, I will lose a little lighting quality. The transmission is too high and I need to reduce it. It refers to the light transmission through the objects. Volume refers to the fog or any volumetric lighting quality, which I discussed earlier. And less fill is the quality of the transparent objects in the scene. I can change it to 3. Reducing these values can increase the render speed, but it will decrease your output quality, so be careful. In the caustic section, we have two fields. As you can see, they are for getting brighter renders. You can turn them off. Make sure to activate the Fast GI option. It will reduce your global illumination quality, resulting in a faster render. In the Simplify section in both the Viewport and Render sections, you can limit your subdivision count. It's not necessary. You can control the subdivision level for each object. Also, you can set the max texture size, but it's not necessary. You can just use 4K textures for each object, for example. In the performance section, there are many fields. I'll leave some parts. In the acceleration section, I need to enable use spatial splits. This option will increase the build time by gives me a faster render. However, it's not a good choice when rendering animations. The persistent data option will keep your temporary data like textures before rendering. It's a good choice for rendering animations. There are many ways to improve performance, and you can suggest them in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments.